Executive Director of the Copenhagen Center for the Advancement of Women in Communication here in the School of Journalism and Mass Communication at Florida National University. I'm delighted to welcome you here this afternoon to the Copenhagen Center Leadership Webinar Series. The purpose of our center is to empower young women professionals and academics in all of the fields of communication in order to develop visionaries and leaders who can make a difference in their professions and in their communities. We invite you to visit us at copenhagencenter.org. You will find videos of our other webinars, information about our mentorship and leadership programs, background on a major study on the role and status of women in the communications industries, which we are currently conducting, and information about our national conference on equity and equality of the sexes in communication. Are women getting there? Which is planned for April 21st and 22nd here in Miami. So thank you for joining us today. It is now my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Stephanie Bertini. Stephanie is an award-winning journalist with more than 10 years experience in television, doing investigative reporting, anchoring, producing, and reporting the weather. She joined the NBC6 News team in South Florida as a reporter in May of last year. Prior to coming to Miami, she worked for the ABC at WFTV in Orlando, ABC affiliate KRGV-TV in South Texas, and Canadian television station CTV News in Northern Ontario. Born and raised in Canada, Stephanie got her on-air start as a segment host for a lifestyle show in the Toronto area while she was still in school. She graduated from a joint program between York University and Seneca College with a Bachelor of Arts in History and a degree in broadcast journalism. Stephanie has received several honors for her reporting, including a National Edward R. Murrow Award, an Emmy nomination, and several recognitions from the Texas Associated Press broadcasters. It is my pleasure to give you Stephanie Bertini. Stephanie?
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for being here live and online with us. I'd like to start by saying I'm so excited to be here and talk with you about the two things I'm most passionate about, television and journalism. When we talk about television news as a craft, we're talking about the set of skills that are required to do this type of job. And I would certainly say that it takes special types of professionals to execute this job properly. When we look at the concept of journalism overall, moving along on our slideshow, journalism in general, I would say, is defined as a lifestyle. You have to take this as a lifestyle if you want to do well, regardless of the medium. So when we look at journalism as a lifestyle, we have the ability to expose injustice, to defend victims, to shed light on issues that would otherwise be untold. And moving along on the slide, you'll see some of the qualities that I've listed that I've noticed that great journalists have, right? Great journalists, they're committed to what they do. They're passionate about what they do. They're determined. They have great ethics. They have courage. They have curiosity because stories are everywhere. It's up to you as the journalist to look for them, to dig for them, to find them. Great journalists are always asking questions, and great journalists, I believe, are selfless. And I'll tell you this, what we do is for the people. We are public servants. This job is not for everybody. This is a huge responsibility. And I believe that if you take this on, you must put journalism first. When we look at the business of television, which is the medium I've always worked in school, I definitely studied broadcasting in general, television and radio. I streamed into television early on while still in school and continued after graduating with a stream in news. Now, when we look at television news in general, it is a business because the bottom line is that it comes down to ratings. The ratings are what drive the advertisers to essentially buy commercials. That's what fuels this beast from an economic standpoint. And in order to have good ratings, you need strong talent. So part of your craft is being strong on the air. And you need engaging content. When I talk about content, it's everything from the video, from the sound, from how the shows are written, from how the reports are written. So from a reporter standpoint or the journalist standpoint, as an on-air talent, it is your job to make sure that everything that you execute on air, and now in this day and age online, is strong in terms of content. And if you look at this overall, other journalists that work in TV, including producers, editors, et cetera, that's the job of everybody, because this very much is a group or a team approach. You know, moving along, I want to talk about some elements of this craft. And before I do that, I just want to quickly say, when we talk about craft in general, in terms of what you need to do in order to do this job well, be a journalist in TV, this is like a newsroom, like the industry, a group effort. You're forever a student of the craft. I am still a student of the craft now, about 10 years into my career, and I will continue to be. When I was in your shoes, aspiring journalists who are joining us today, or young journalists who are joining us today, I learned from instructors, from mentors, and from others, people that I worked with when I started in my career, people who were the same level of experience as me and maybe just a little more. Because this craft is something that's learned. I learned so much from my photographers, from my editors, not only the other reporters and anchors, but everybody that contributes to this. So I think if you decide you want to do this job, you go in with the mindset that you're forever a teacher and forever a learner, right? These are some of the things that are required when we talk about elements. Craft involves weaving words, sounds, pictures. Pictures being video and or stills. Sounds being natural sounds, if you're familiar with that term. So sometimes that little gnat sound in a TV story of a dog barking or a child crying. These are the things that come together to help make that story or that piece that we're putting to the air a little more colorful, a little more effective. Because when we talk about craft, what we want to do is capture the attention of our viewers. Because again, if they're not watching, the TV stations aren't getting ratings and we failed at our job, right? So we talk about weaving words, sounds, and pictures together. We talk about how you gather the news, because news gathering is an integral part of the craft, right? You have to be ethical. You have to work sources on and off the record. You have to do good research. You have to double check and fact check and keep checking. You have to conduct strong interviews, not only with the politicians and the police chiefs, but also with the ordinary people on the road that sometimes will give you better sound bites than the people in charge. You have to hold people accountable when you're gathering the news, but you also have to be kind, because again, this job is not about you, it's about them. And then when we talk about craft, there's a little math in this. Most journalists aren't great at math, I can tell you I'm not. But you know, it's TV, there's time limits. The average television story is 2 minutes long, and that includes the anchor's toss to the reporter and the reporter's toss to their package. Like, that's the whole piece. You lift a news story, it's 1:30 or less. So you have to hit those time limits and you have to meet your deadlines, because at the end of the day, when that newscast comes on, you better be there. And this all comes down into your delivery, right? So everything that you do in your craft comes down to your delivery. And the more command you have of your craft, the better you are at this, the stronger your delivery will be. I have some video for you today, so we're going to cue up that video, and we're going to start with just a quick montage. And as we're getting this ready going into this, I just want to say that I'd like you to pay attention to some of the elements that I just talked about, and then we will debrief after the video. But everything from the use of natural sound to what the reporter, being me, is doing on air, to the content, to the attributing sources, all of this, again, comes down to craft. And I really want to drive this home. When I speak about craft, I'm not just talking about what's on the air, but what we've done to get to what's on the air.
The price of a single ticket, just $2. Quick picks, please.
Yes, that.
Thank you. The chances of actually hitting every number, 1 in 292 million. Thank you. But with this jackpot being the biggest in history, that small chance is hard for almost anybody to pass up. We found this piece of glass not far from the parking spot of the vehicle of that victim you just heard from, and we've reached out to police to find out exactly how many other vehicles in this lot were hit.
Here's where that bench was. You can still see where it was bolted down to the concrete.
Miami-Dade Fire Rescue was called to a business down this road.
And Stephanie, we know just moments ago you spoke with police.
Yeah, Keith, right now we're standing across from the high school. You could see the yellow tape here blocking off Northwest 17th Avenue and Northwest 38th Street. And this is where investigators say it all went down. Now, we know this red vehicle was involved. Investigators say the driver of the red vehicle you see in the video, the owner, her trainee, and that little boy followed the suspect that way to this wall, and then they say he took off running in that.
So we talked about the use of natural sound, right? Me doing this to the wall, right? That's a natural sound. The first stand-up, which I did in collaboration with my photographer, the lotto story. So everybody knows about that huge lotto story that we've been covering, right? So I said to my photographer, let's do something a little interactive, right? And we're gonna get into the slides right now because I have a list for you in terms of on-air reporting in general, the elements that you can use. But I said, let's be a little interactive, right? So I said to my photographer, what I would like to do is I'd like to be in the line because, you know, just $2 can change your life, right? Everybody will remember that. So I said, I'd like to use that prop, the money. Then I'd like to be in the line. Then I want to put some gnats in there. And then he said to me, okay, Stephanie, let's do it. So this is a photographer who has now honed his craft, right? So together we were able to make that first piece that you saw with me in the line, that has several edit points, right? So when you're the craft, you see in just that one stand-up, which I think is just a great example, the use of natural sound, the use of, you know, writing to, you don't want to overwrite, right? So we don't need to say $2 bills, $2. I have the $2 bills in my hand, right? So we don't want to overwrite to what we're saying or to the video. We don't want to overuse sound. We want quick, quick, quick. Because again, getting down to the time, to the math of this, TV is quick, right? But we want to do everything in a way that everything we put on the air is engaging, is going to capture the viewer, right? So me being at the scene, if I have not spoken to police yet, right? But I notice, oh, this piece of glass. All right, let's point this out. And now we're working to ask police about A, B, C, D, and E. You noticed and we can get to the slide, but you noticed in the breaking news when I was, you know, out in the elements and they tossed to me, I just got out of a scrum or a press conference with police and we were on the minute. Wind, right? So the wind blew my hair and my face. Well, those are the elements that you face. And it's fine because if we were in person, I would move the hair out of my face, and that's what we do on TV, right? So we want to be as real as possible, as transparent as possible, as dynamic as possible. We want to bring the viewers in with what we're doing, okay? So to the next slide here, I've listed some things when it comes to on-air reporting. So interactive performance, that includes bringing your viewer there. So standing in the line, bending down, right? Look at what we found as opposed to just standing up and pointing to it. Being engaging, you want to make that viewer feel like they're there with you, right? Because if they feel like they're there with you, they're going to feel like you're giving them something, right? That they may not be able to get watching other reporters. And then you want to source because that comes down to credibility. You notice police say, investigators say, according to people who live here, right? Remember that your job is still of a journalist. And so the ethics have to be at the forefront, right? Some of these other things I've listed for you on the slide, using your location. So sometimes when you get to a scene and you haven't talked with everybody there yet and you have to be live, or maybe you got to feed something to social media, which we'll go over a little later, right? So use your location. What do I see? I see yellow tape. How can I use that yellow tape? Well, it's blocking off this area, right? Remember that stand-up, right? So use your location. Again, source your information. Withhold your opinions, usually, to be continued. We'll get back to that point. But you do want to withhold your opinions, especially in your early years of reporting. Let the sound bites convey the opinions because that's the people there, right? Okay? So let those sound bites convey the opinion. I talk about the second last bullet point, explaining beyond the camera's view. So sometimes you will be somewhere and something like yellow tape is blocking you off, right? Or even if you're anchoring and you're sitting at the desk and you're throwing to like a helicopter video and you're saying, this is what we're seeing, blah, blah, blah. Beyond the view is what we don't see, right? So the obvious is you're looking at a crime scene. We see a lot of officers. But the better way to do it is, well, at last check with investigators, 49 officers are on the ground and they're calling for back. So that's writing beyond the camera's view, okay? You want to add to the content. And then select your sound and pictures very, very carefully, because the sound and pictures at the end of the day, that contributes to the craft. And the better that you get at the craft, moving on with the slides here, the better that you will get at doing this. In TV, news reporting is more than just the facts. The facts are absolutely important. The facts are forefront. The facts are the journalism. The facts are what you get from, talking to sources, from attributing sources on the air, from requesting documents, from asking good questions. But at the end of the day, we're telling stories, people, and that hasn't changed. From the beginning of time till now, from the beginning of journalism to now, this is storytelling. And in television, again, you have a very short window of time to tell your stories. So that's where the strong photography, the use of the natural sound, the engaging characters, and colorful sound bites come in. Moving to video, I'm going to show you two examples of stories that are actually crime stories. They're stories that could, simply be police say. But I want you to pay attention to the characters we have in these stories and to the other elements that make them a story and not just a report.
The victim told me she was making her way into this art gallery when she was attacked on this street. Tonight, more than a month later, Miami police are still looking for the woman responsible for an attempted purse snatching that left the victim hurt but not defeated. It happened in Wynwood in broad daylight. This is a look at the scrapes left behind from an attack the victim is still shaken by. She asked us not to show her face.
She turned around and she started running and she pulled me to take my purse.
This is the purse still by her side tonight. The victim says her attacker got away with nothing. In this surveillance video, you can see the victim holding onto her bag tightly, and the woman who police are looking for now dragged the victim across a section of Northwest 26th Street. Detectives say it happened on July 6th, but police didn't start investigating until the next day because the victim waited to report it.
She was a bit scared, shaken up when it initially occurred, so we can't start investigating a crime if there's not a victim that comes forward. So the investigation began the day after the actual crime, so we need the community's help.
Tonight, police are releasing this surveillance video in hopes it might jog someone's memory and maybe bring in a tip that could crack the case. Are you shocked that this happened to you?
Yes, because I'm from Venezuela and it's very strange and weird that this happened here.
The young woman says her family moved to America to escape the constant threat of this kind of crime. And so now the fact that something like this happened here in a place like Wynwood, where she once felt safe, is a reminder of the constant fear she once lived with.
I'm a little bit scared that something happens to me again.
She's hoping police catch the woman responsible. In the video, you see her taking off in this vehicle. Police don't recommend anybody fight off a thief like this woman did because they say this could have been a lot worse for the victim. Tonight, anyone with any information has to call Crime Stoppers, and we have that number for you at the bottom of the screen. I'm reporting live in Wynwood tonight. Stephanie Bertini, NBC 6 News. And here's a picture of the woman on the front door of the store. The image frozen from surveillance video captured on cameras inside. The owners here say she walked in and walked out with a wad of cash. Walking through the aisles quickly turned into walking through the areas off limits to customers. The owners of this store would soon find out this woman had no intentions of buying anything.
It feels that she's stealing from my family, our business, our hard work.
Valsan is a family business, Martha Valdez says, with more than a 25-year history, and she or her relatives have never had to deal with something or someone like this. In this store surveillance video, you see the woman make her way into the back office with a shopping basket in hand. She looks around, takes a call, leaves, and comes back with a different basket. This time, she gets more invasive.
She tried to mix with an iPad. She put it in her purse, but while she was searching, she, I guess, changed her mind, put the iPad back, and took the cash instead.
How much money?
About $1,100.
The money was petty cash for the cashiers. The crime, according to Valdez, happened Sunday afternoon, but wasn't discovered until the next day.
We checked that petty cash every morning, and as soon as they opened the cabinet, all the money was gone.
Somehow the woman managed to carry out the entire unnoticed by the staff who work here and the customers.
There was a lot of customers in the store, and also she was dressed in full black, which is our uniform for our employees, so she blended in.
Now the woman's picture is up throughout the store, and the owners have their fingers crossed. They hope police catch her soon.
And police say this woman could be connected to recent thefts at beauty salons in the area. Anyone with any info on this crime or this woman, asked to call Crime Stoppers. The number's at the bottom of your screen.
Okay, so a couple things there. You see how we use, again, these characters to tell our story, right? The last one that we saw, which was the theft that happened at that store, it wouldn't be such a memorable story if it was business and these people felt so slighted and how could this happen and blah, 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 because that is what makes us as viewers connect to it, right? We all have families. We all have people we care about. And so that's a universal theme. When I talk about universal themes in reporting, you want to draw on those things that everybody would kind of absolutely understand or resonate with. The death of a child. Nobody would say, or most people wouldn't say, oh, people would be touched by that. People would think that was sad. So these are the types of universal themes that I'm talking about. Now, you notice the use of surveillance video, and I saw some of you with that first report. Oh, wow. So here in South Florida, I've worked actually in Florida, in Orlando, Central Florida, and here in South Florida. So in the Miami market, there's a lot of use of surveillance video, right? So surveillance video is actually a public document, so to speak. It's a public record. You can access that. And so using that in your reporting sometimes helps you make a stronger story because, again, it's all about the elements. It's all about the video. You saw me interview, and we're going to move on with the slides, but one more point on this last slide before we go. You saw me interview somebody that, didn't really speak very good English, right? You'll see another example of that coming up. Well, again, we care about people, right? So it's our job, right? If we're interviewing somebody that's integral to our stories in TV, that maybe English isn't their first language, to help them, right? To help them by things like, so how did that make you feel? And maybe using your questions on the air to help them hammer through their point is my point, right? So you want to help the people that you're interviewing if they don't have such a strong command of the language, kind of get it across, right? So that, again, comes down to craft. When we look at, moving on in the slides, strong reporters overall, I've listed some of the characteristics that I've noticed make strong reporters. Strong reporters break stories. They bring exclusives. They enterprise story ideas, but also angles. So how can we do this story differently? What is different about our report at NBC6, where I work today, than what the competition's going to have? That adds to your stock as a reporter. And the better you are at the craft, the better you are at recognizing when you're gathering the news in the field, what you can do to make the reports different, the more of an asset you are to the station that you work for. You know, good reporters, they dig deep. They don't just take what's on the surface. So if somebody just told me, oh, the purse snatching was awful, well, I want to see it. Right? I want to see what you're talking about. So again, we don't want to take anything as face value. We want to tell the truth, but we want to make sure we fact check the truth. Now, another important thing about good reporters is that they follow up stories. And we're going to look at a couple video examples coming up. The first two are follow-up. So I report for the 11 p.m. every night. I often report for 5 and 6. So sometimes, like on this particular day, that you'll see right now in the video we're about to queue up, I will do a story for 6 o'clock, let's say, in this case, and then again at 11. So look at what's the same, look at what's different. And then the last piece, pay attention to the new details. I just took the 11 story from the last piece. We're about to watch 3 pieces of video. I just took the 11 story, but I also did an earlier report. And you notice the anchor off the top, he's going to push new details. Again, your value as a reporter, you call your producers and say, look what I got. Go ahead.
Disturbing crime against a child is caught on camera. The boy was watching cartoons on an iPad while his mother was working in a salon when a man comes in and just snatches it from his hands. However, there is a happy ending to this story. NBC6 reporter Stephanie Bertini spoke with that child's mother. She joins us live from the Tamarack Salon with more. Tell us the good news, Stephanie.
Well, Jackie, that happy ending came within the last hour when a family walked through the door of the salon and gave that little boy a new iPad. The iPad in Alejandro Rico's hands is brand new, just given to him by this family. This man says he and his wife decided to do something after finding out from a Facebook post that the boy was the victim of a thief.
That's a horrible thing to happen to a kid like that.
The crime was caught on camera. You see Alejandro sitting in this beauty salon. That's the suspect investigators are looking for now. The little boy is only 4 years old. But he knows what happened was wrong. He says it was scary. His mom says it all happened so fast. She's training at this under the owner. She says a few days ago that suspect walked in and asked if his mom was in the place. When she turned her back, investigators say the iPad was snatched.
It's crazy.
The owner was also here. She says she's been in business for 12 years and nothing like this has ever happened. The owner, her trainee, and that little boy followed the suspect that way to this wall, and then they say he took off running in that direction, jumped that way. That's when they lost him. And then they called 911.
The police say I'm a little bit crazy because my reaction was just follow the guy, and that's what we did it.
Now the Broward County Sheriff's Office is looking for the guy. Today changed the mood of this place. Mom says it's proof that there's good people out there too. Anyone with any information on the crime is asked to contact Crime Stoppers, and that number is at the bottom of your screen tonight. Reporting live in Tamarack, I'm Stephanie Bertini, NBC6 News.
This video may have you asking, how low can people get? A thief in Tamarack is seen on this surveillance video stealing an iPad from a 4-year-old. NBC6 reporter Stephanie Bertini spoke with that boy as BSO deputies search for the teen robber tonight. Stephanie?
Yeah, investigators say that teenager stands about 5'6". He was last seen taken off from the business. Surveillance cameras inside the salon caught it all. The crime against a victim so young inspired a big name to come forward. It was a quick delivery, a gift for Alejandro Rico, days after his iPad was snatched from his hands. This is surveillance video from inside the Tamarack salon, where the child's mother works. Deputies are looking for the suspect now, and the 4-year-old victim has something to smile about now. But what he or anyone else in the salon didn't know this afternoon was the name behind the family that delivered the act of kindness.
We should give when somebody needs.
That's the philosophy 1976 Olympic boxing gold medalist Howard Davis Jr. lives by.
This wasn't for publicity either.
Are you kidding me? No. At this time, we're relaxing.
Still, the Davis family let us into their home tonight. Turns out their plan to slip away unnoticed didn't work out. So why did they rush to the store to buy a stranger's child a new iPad? Well, first, Mrs. Davis learned what happened on Facebook.
When I saw that, it touched me, because I can imagine Samia with her iPad, and if somebody did that to her, I wouldn't know what I would do.
The boy's mother was so touched by what the family did. She said this is a reminder that there are good people out there. Helping others has been a hobby for this boxing champ in his retirement years. Tonight, I asked him if success created his desire to give.
Winning is one thing, but losing teaches you more. Boxing is a metaphor for life. It really is. You know, you heard the saying, get knocked down and dusting yourself off and get back up. It's the same thing in life.
And the hundreds of dollars the Davises spent on perfect strangers was just like holding out a hand to help this mother who doesn't have much and her little boy who was violated get back up. The owner of the salon told me she was so touched by this act of kindness. Still, she's hoping police catch the guy responsible. Anyone with information asked to call Crime Stoppers tonight. The number is at the bottom of your screen. Reporting live in Tamarack, I'm Stephanie Bertini, NBC6 News.
Burglary at a South Florida seafood warehouse. Tonight, the owners are hoping DNA evidence will be the clue investigators need to find these thieves. NBC reporter Stephanie Bertini joins us live from Miami with the new details. Stephanie?
Well, the owners say that police found blood near the hole they believe the thieves created to get inside. Tonight, they're hoping that blood could lead to an identification in terms of who's responsible for this theft that will surely create a financial dent in this family business. He's been in business for 30 years. But fish distributor Reynaldo Diaz says what happened overnight, nothing like he's ever seen before.
This is where they did it.
It's boarded up now, but Diaz says crooks made this hole in this freezer's wall, gained access from outside, and took an estimated $30,000 worth of frozen fish.
Were you shocked?
Yeah. It was very devastating to receive the phone call from the police department this morning, letting us know that they had broken into our business.
Gudelia Diaz helps her husband run the business. She says they got from police around 6 a.m., rushed in and saw one of their 2 freezers empty with their own eyes.
The second one, which is the one behind me, was not touched.
She took us inside that second freezer. Boxes. This is what the one that was emptied looked like.
We estimate that they took over 200 boxes out of that hole that they made in the wall, so they must have spent a lot of time doing the damage.
Damage that will hurt the family business financially. Even the couple's children understand that.
I know that it's going to affect us, and I know that things are going to be tough.
Now the family wants justice. This is Diaz speaking with a police investigator earlier this evening. And it turns out some traces left behind might help crack the case.
They were able to find some blood in one of the places where they broke into, so hopefully, they can get some DNA from there and we can find out who did this.
Back out here live, that hole is located behind this gate. See the lock? Well, the owners say the gate is locked all the time overnight, and so those thieves would have had to gain access by either jumping that fence or getting on the other side of it some other way. Reporting live in Northwest Miami-Dade tonight, I'm Stephanie Bertini, NBC 6 News.
It's an interview you'll see only on...
So, hello to Dr. Jacobson's class. I know that they've been having a couple technical issues, so thank you for being here, being patient with us. Getting back to the slideshow, some of the things that we went over going into this video, I think I was able to show examples of. So again, being you interview, helping them along when they need a little help if English isn't their second language. This goes back, isn't their first language rather. This goes back to understanding your community, right? We're in South Florida, so there's a lot of Latinos. There's a lot of other cultures in general. It's a multicultural community. So understanding that and finding ways, one time when I was reporting in South Texas, I was trying to get a child refugee and I finally got one. He was from Ethiopia. How am I going to talk to this child, right? So I looked and I researched and I found a professor from a university in Houston. I was reporting at the border and I basically organized with him to Skype in and to translate my questions. Then I found out when I got there and see the power of language, and I think as a journalist, the more travel you do, the more languages you speak, the better. Well, I found out that for a section of his life, he and his mother were hiding out in the house of an Italian family, so I was able to interview him in Italian. So when you can do whatever you can to communicate with the subjects of your story, don't pass it off is what I'm trying to say. Oh, he doesn't speak English. So what? Your job is to get that on the air. That's your job. And that is your responsibility as a journalist, okay? So, this notion of caring about people, I really believe it should be at the forefront of what you do, regardless of the medium, and I can't say that enough. Now, moving on to the next slide, we're talking about emotion. Now, I believe emotion is the key to your craft, especially in TV. The words, the sounds, the pictures. What happened, the facts are dry compared to how what happened made people feel. Okay, how people feel, that's the cause and effect, right? The crime is one thing. How did the victim feel? How about the veteran cop who's been working the streets for more than 3 decades, right? If I get a veteran officer to tell me I've never seen anything like this before in my career, you better bet that soundbite is going in my story. You know why? Because it adds the context. It gives the why. It hits the emotion. Emotion isn't always sad. It isn't always happy. Sometimes it's curious. Sometimes it's wonder. There's a range of emotions like in real life. And what we're doing is we're putting real life in a television story that's less than 2 minutes and putting it on the air. You want to always try to tell stories that relate to your viewers, and that goes back to understanding your community. When you're using video, the idea behind video, right? Wide, medium, tight. What is the use for these shots? You want to convey something super emotional, you're going to use a close-up, like we did of that. You noticed in the story with the iPad, mom and the little boy both didn't speak English very well, right? But we used close-ups on that little boy, and we used other elements to tell that story in an emotional way, okay? Again, right beyond your screen, what are we not seeing? What is the context, right? How great was it when that boxer said, you know, he's a champion. Winning teaches you, but losing teaches you more. How's that for a universal theme? Whatever we're talking about, I'm sure everybody that's ever lost something can relate to that, right? Let the sound bites convey the emotion. I can't stress this hard enough. Sometimes we as reporters can say something that we observe that is an opinion that hits a universal theme. Like, I reported not too long ago, a 2-year-old that was accidentally hit by a vehicle. It was a child's aunt that hit the child died, right? In that case, Joanne, one of our maid anchors, threw to me in the field, Stephanie, this is just a tragedy. And I said right on the air, absolutely sad. Everybody in this community is affected. This entire block, we can feel the sadness tonight. And that was absolutely true. So it is okay to do that when it is absolutely sad in this case, or absolutely joyful and absolutely true. Getting fixed, it has to be absolutely true. The elements of show business apply in TV, like yes, it has to be catchy, it has to be this, it has to be that, but at the end of the day, it has to be true because this is journalism. And we can't forget that. We can't get lost in that. I want to talk a little bit about social media. So moving to the next slide, social media is part of your news gathering process. It is another way to deliver content. Sometimes nowadays, the first way, right? So sometimes I find myself now, I'm breaking something on social, on Twitter, before it's hitting the air. That's the reality of this day and age, right? So you have to have a good grasp of social and understand how to use it. It's also another way to engage with your viewers. I would argue Facebook more than Twitter. So Facebook, I have a lot of fans that still follow me from Texas, from South Texas, which was 2 jobs ago at this point, years ago. And they write me, Stephanie, how you doing? And I engage with them, even if it's a simple Happy New Year, right? I got a bunch of Happy New Years. I try to answer as many of them as possible. So the days of the paper fan mail are gone, but we're still engaging online, right? And then when, you know, I'm sure everyone here has a cell phone, right? So this is my Twitter page, and this is my Facebook page. My Facebook page is a fan page. It's under Stephanie Bertini Journalist. You can pull it up now if you like. My Twitter page is, the handle is @StephanieNBC6, right? You can pull it up now if you like. You scroll through these social media platforms, you will see. On Twitter, I'm usually using #breaking, #update. That's the update to the breaking. I'm also retweeting. So if my colleagues are doing big stories, I'm retweeting what they're doing. And I'm retweeting with what NBC Network News is doing and other relevant information. So I would say Twitter, you want to use for a more immediate, you know, a tweet is only so long, boom, this is what's happening. Facebook, rather, you'll notice that sometimes I post stories, sometimes I'm posting process, the news gathering process. Sometimes I'll take a couple pictures and I'll post several pictures, an album, and I'll say, you know, this is what we're doing. I did that most recently with one of the lotto stories that I covered, right? So there's different ways to use still pictures and to use actual pictures that you're shooting off your cell phone. You get to a scene and you see something remarkable, shoot it on your cell phone, put it on social, call your assignment desk and send it to them because probably your station's website's going to want to put it on too, right? So this is all about using social media as an extension of what we do. So it's not just about television. Now the craft involves using social media effectively. Not only to say, sometimes I will put, and you'll notice, getting ready for my live shot, or tonight at 11, I'm live in 2 minutes. This is what I'm covering. I will use social for that. So I'm driving the viewers to the TV, right? Turn on your TVs now. But I'm also using it to disseminate information, right? So the primary way I disseminate information, my primary focus is TV, but social comes hand in hand with that because it just has to, regardless of the medium nowadays. Moving on, and we're open for questions, so you can start sending through your questions, and we will be addressing questions at the end. But a little while ago, and we're going to try to make this available also online after the fact, and I have copies for everybody. I compiled this sheet called A Piece of Advice from veteran journalists around the world. And I've just chosen a couple of them, but on the handout, there's several more. And I want to read these because I think that it helps to kind of tie a bow on what we're talking about today. These are all people that work in television. So these are all people that, in my opinion, I respect. I expect to have good advice, actually, and I respect very much. So I have high expectations of these professionals, and I respect what they say very much. A lot of them are my mentors or colleagues, and I think that they kind of help hammer home the experiences. So just like every story we cover is different, the experience of every TV journalist is different. But there's these universal themes, again, that we use in our reporting and in our experiences that bind us, right? We are those people who decided to put other people first, right? Stephen Stock, he's an investigative reporter. He's been doing it for decades. He works for NBC in the Bay Area. He writes, "Love what you do. Be passionate. Follow your passion and your heart. Give everything you've got, and despite the many bumps in the road." And then, as an aside, and there will be many in this business, always remember that if you do it right, you'll change the world. So then we have Les Rose. He's a photojournalist. He's a photographer for CBS Network in Los Angeles, a great mentor of mine. I've learned a lot from him. He says, when you have an internship, arrive early and stay late. Work holidays, nights, and weekends. Short staff means more chances for you. And be kind to every single person at the station, exclamation mark. Have a dream of where you are going to be in 5 years. If you don't have dreams, they cannot become true. Be willing to move anywhere. Do not limit your job hunt to your home station or region. Moving on the slide. Polo Sandoval, my former co-anchor from KRGV in South Texas, is now a national correspondent for CNN News Source. He's based in Washington, D.C. Crave critiques from colleagues. Remember, a journalist never stops learning. Every story should leave them with a small nugget of knowledge they can keep in their arsenal, right? How's that for describing growing your craft, right? Then Christina Tenalia, a very good friend of mine. She's a reporter for CP24 in Toronto, Canada. This is not an easy business. It requires a lot of hard work, perseverance, and patience. But I've noticed that those who've had the courage and commitment to stick through it and stay in the game always achieve their goals. You will get rejected many times. You will watch your friends and peers get promotions, opportunities, and jobs ahead of you. But the only person's career you need to worry about is yours. If you keep at it, keep focused, and keep improving your craft, keep seeking advice from mentors and superiors, you will make it. And to the last slide, Aska Jajeno, she's a reporter in Pakistan. She writes, as it is said, a journalist is the voice to voiceless millions. You definitely have the will and potential to live up to the quotation. Hold your head high with pride on choosing the profession of truth. Journalism, if done wholeheartedly, becomes a passion and not just a profession. And finally, for me, dream beyond reason and reach beyond your limits. Believe in your talents and appreciate your gifts. Embrace that you have made a choice to serve others forever by telling the truth. So we're about to take questions. And before we go into the questions, I just want to say, this really is something that has to come from within. It's a calling. It has to come from the bottom of your heart. Because if not, you just won't do it well. It's not fair to the communities you're serving. It's not fair to the great journalists before you. And it's not fair to the craft for anybody to take on this job and not do it with all their heart. So for anybody who dreams of doing this, I would say, yes, you can. Anybody can. Yes, you can. But you have to be willing to put this ahead of you. And I know it sounds tough, right? I lived it. I'm still living it. It's really, really tough. But so are the lives of the victims we cover, right? So is losing your home in a flood, So is having an iPad taken when you're 4 years old and you come from a poor family. The people that we cover, the situations we cover, those are tough situations. And so if we are going to say we will report on these people, then we must accept the challenges that come with growing our craft and working through this profession, no matter what the medium is. So getting to the questions, Markelly Brown asked me, when you receive a press release or a pitch, what do you look for? So when we receive press releases, it depends often on who they're coming from, right? So if it's from police, we're always attributing police, say, right? So a police agency or an investigator or an officer is considered an expert that we would attribute, right? So we're going to vet that. We're going to call them. We're going to ask questions. We're going to ask for an interview. We're going to decide if there's news value in the story, right? And if we go out and cover it, we're going to look for sound bites. But if it's coming from a police agency, which in daily local news, a lot of the press releases do, we're going to decide, are we covering this and why? And then we're going to go out and we're going to get the details from the experts or the investigators, the people working it, and then we're going to look in the field for the characters that are going to help us tell a memorable story, right? If we're getting a press release from a business or an agency, a nonprofit, we're going to vet it. It's probably going to involve the work of more than one journalist. So if I get a press release and I think there's something newsworthy in this press release, I'm going to talk with my assignment editors, I'm going to talk with my producers, and we're going to decide, is this story, what are the stakeholders, right? What is the news value? Will our viewers benefit from covering this? And if so, what's the story we're going to tell? Then we're going to go out and we're going to find the characters to tell it. Sometimes we get press releases and they don't have news value in the local community we serve. They're not hard-hitting enough in terms of a news standpoint, and so we move on. So in short, that's what we look for. This question is from Adriana. How do you balance content on social media versus live television? This is a good one. So if it is breaking and everybody is there, as in every station, this is going to hit social first. And so what's going to hit social is the what. The what is happening. Hashtag breaking, happening now. Boom, boom, boom. 3 shot according to police. You still got a source on social. Or hashtag breaking. Huge police roadblock, yellow tape blocking, these roads. We are working to find out what's going on. Myself and my photographer just parked our news unit. We just got here, right? So we're going to add process into social, but we're going to put the most immediate in the quickest way on social. Sometimes we're going to use pictures. That depends. Now, if you're bringing an exclusive story to your station, you're not going to tweet about it. If it's an investigation coming up to air, there'll be some promotion, there'll be some ways to handle it, but you're not going to tweet early on, like at 6 o'clock, I'm working on this for 11, because it's an exclusive. That's part of the station's brand, right? You don't want to have someone else come and scoop it up. So exclusives are a little different than covering daily news, but in general, you have to that whatever you're doing on the air is likely hitting social media first. Question from Adiva. What was your first breaking story? Well, let me think. I do remember, actually, because I've told this story before. I was 22, just turned 22, working my first job as a news reporter, and I got sent to a breaking news. So, right, the assignment is now, this is the days before social was so predominant, right? So the assignment is, we were really, really far from the station, and the technology that we had to drive the story back. We could not feed from a live truck. We were not in a live truck, right? Like nowadays, I can get anything to the station quick enough. At that time, we couldn't. So this is when I was reporting in Canada, Sudbury, Ontario. It's a drowning. So a couple of kids my age, 22 to 25, were camping. And one of them got drunk, went out on a boat, and never came back. Imagine covering that when you're like, basically, these are like, this could have been my friends, you know? So we get all the details. I got to bring back this story. And I knocked. They had a trailer that they had set up on the campsite. And I knocked, right? And they were so abrasive, and they said to me, leave us alone. We just lost our friend. And I said, I'm just trying to do my job. I understand. And they looked at me up and down, and they said, you look like you should have been out here partying with us yesterday, not holding that microphone. And they were mad, because sometimes when you cover these types of stories, the families of victims, they feel invaded, right? The whole drive back to the station, covering that breaking news story, right? It's supposed to be exciting. Well, I remember it because I cried the whole ride back. You look at the tragedies people face, and I was just thinking, how could those friends feel? And I felt so awful for invading their space, and how does, the parents of this young man that just died, how will they feel when they get the call, right? And you start balancing and thinking in your head, at what point are we doing our job, and at what point are we harming people, right? My photographer, which was a veteran, as hard as they come, looked at me and said, as he threw his cig out of the window, kid, better get used to it. Can't go home crying every time. And he was right. And I continued to cry for years and years. But now I don't cry anymore, because I've just come to the place that I realize how selfish. A mentor told me once, it's selfish to cry, right? So if I'm interviewing you and I'm crying, I'm making this about me, and that's not my job, right? But of course, we're people and we feel, but we have to balance that. But anyways, that's the story of the first breaking news story I covered. We have a live question. Let me take this one and then I'll go to you, okay? Adriana says, are the online clips posted different from what is reported live? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. So sometimes they will post the whole story. Sometimes they'll post raw video. So you get to a fire. I, the reporter, take out my cell phone. I shoot the video. I send it back. And sometimes they'll post that video online. Like right now, we have a news crew at ABCD&E. We'll update you online. Tune in at 6. So sometimes they'll post that raw video, and then later maybe post the whole story. Sometimes that video I've shot on my cell phone that's already hit online, already hit social, if it's the best video, I'll use it in my actual report. And I'll say something that attributes the process. As soon as we got here, I took out my cell phone, and you can see the flames were ferocious. Maybe a nap pop. After our cameras captured the aftermath. Boom, devastation, right? Okay, so from the audience, go ahead. So when I started, I did a lot of internships, actually. I really did serve coffee in green rooms. I really did pick up clothes for talent. I did a lot. I rolled prompter. I was a floor director. I did a lot in internship positions. So I was the one that any opportunity I could get my hands on, I would get, because I wanted a full resume. In my last year, I had the opportunity to report for this lifestyle show as a segment host. So they had a main host, and then everyone did a segment. I did one a week. I did not get paid for it, but I did it on the air nevertheless. It was a cable station in Canada, Toronto area, and that went on. So I had some on-camera experience. News reporting, the first job I got, I landed by going to an industry conference in Canada. Like here, they have, it's now RTDNA. At the time, it was RTNDA, sign of the time. So the D is digital, right? So RTNDA. Now it's Radio Television News Directors Association. Now it's Radio Television Digital, blah, blah, blah. Anyways, digital's in there. The point is, I went to this conference and networked at the conference with my demo tapes. At the time, it was a DVD. I know now they're just like online links. And my face was on it. It was, yeah, quite cute, quite embarrassing. And on it with like a headshot like this, and I gave it to everybody, and I bothered a lot of the news directors, and then one called me. And I went to this interview. My dad drove me. It was up north, 4 hours from where I lived in Toronto. And I was like, wow, there's cows. Growing up in the city, right? And anyway, so I had this interview, and then on the way back, I was just really quiet, and my dad says, well, what's wrong? And I said, well, if they hire me, this is where I'm going to live, I was a kid. I was 21 at the time. And he says to me, well, you better decide now if this is what you want to do. So I got the call 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, we moved beside the cows. And it was like a large mining industry as well, Sudbury, Ontario. But the point is that, I had to make the sacrifice to move out of my element. The job came from networking, but also I had a resume that had a lot of experience from an internship standpoint, including on the air. So not an opportunity everyone can get, but I would just stress doing whatever you can. Especially nowadays, even if you get if you want to do TV, but you get an opportunity in print or an opportunity in another medium, radio, that still helps, right? You want to be like the most versatile and the strongest you can be on your resume at any time. That continues throughout your career, right? So when you get more competitive in your career, like, so Miami, the market is top 20. When you're looking at top 20 or top 10 or network, they're always looking for the strongest resume. What have you done? What have you covered? So it extends a little more than, just what was your experience. It's also your life experience as you continue to be a journalist. But that is something that comes down to the craft as well. Like, you start honing that now, getting these skills. As Polo put it, you get these things and you put them in your toolbox, right? Like you're acquiring experience, you're acquiring everything to set you up for the next job. So this is a different one. Ashley, what obstacles have you faced and any advice for graduates? So for those of you who were listening to my wonderful introduction, so I'm Canadian born. I am a Canadian journalist. So when I was in school and I told my professors, I want to go work in the US because the industry is so much bigger and I want to go to New York and I want to do all these great things, they were like, yeah, that's not going to happen. Right. So this was post 9/11. They're not, that's not going to happen. I mean, they're not giving out work visas. And so everybody really told me, like, this is not going to happen. I had one professor who I still am in contact with, who became a great mentor to me and still is. That was the only person that told me it could happen. Everybody else told me it is not going to happen. And as I started my career, people told me this is not going to happen. I started at, it's a little different in Canada. So basically, here there's affiliates and owned and operated stations in local news. So in Canada, it's either cable or it is an O&O. So I started at CTV, Northern Ontario would be the equivalent to an O&O. How NBC6 is O&O for NBC Network. So I started in a B market. Here the markets are numbered 1 to 200 something. There it's A, B, C. I started in a B market. So it was a little advanced. I started in a contract position, then they gave me full time. But the point is that, when I started, it was the same thing, you're always reminded of what you don't have. I started in a newsroom where everyone there was a veteran. All the young reporters started in the bureaus, right? But I got the opportunity to start in the station. That was tough when, everyone's kind of, without saying it, reminding you that, you haven't worked as hard as they have to be there, right? And that continues, right? It really is a tough business. People will always remind you of what you don't have. But, what I did is I said, this is my dream. And that's why in my quote, I said, dream beyond reason. Because when everybody told me it was impossible, but I still wanted to do that. So what did I do? I started networking with trainers in the US. I did a lot of work with Pointer. I started reaching out to different universities, understanding what I had to do to get here. I had to change my on-air performance a lot. The Canadian model is much more conservative. So I had to basically learn a more interactive style. I had to, here we use more common language, like these guys or bad guys. In Canada, it's more like the suspects. So I had to learn how to change all that to make a demo tape that I could send to agents. And then I went to New York with this demo tape and nobody saw me except for one agent. And that agent told me he wasn't going to sign me. So this went on and on and on. Finally, I went to another conference. I continued to go to the industry conferences. I can't stress networking enough. I'm here. I'm available to you. Any of you can reach out to me. Maybe I won't get back to you after the first email. I get a lot of emails a day, but I will get back to you. I will help you. It's up to you to reach out, though. And so this was always what I understood. It's intimidating, but I always reached out to the people that could help me, get to the next step. In short, one day I went to a conference and I met my news director, Jenny Martinez from KRGV in South Texas, and she hired me. And so everybody that told me I couldn't do it, well, I did it. Well, I believe that if I could do that, you all can do what you want to do, but you have to work for it. So Adriana writes, how do you capture the attention of millennials? So I guess she's talking about young people. Because old people watch the news. Okay, So here's the thing, right? So when I started reporting, it's very intimidating because I know at the time and still know, because I mean, I'm not that old, that my audience, most of them are older than I am. So you have a certain expectation and a pressure to kind of have credibility and speak their language. And at first, I think that created some problems for me, right? A lot of young female reporters talk about getting the bob, wearing the clothes that are kind of, you know, you look kind of silly in because the clothes your mom would wear, right? So doing all these things, right, to fit in, right? So I think that kind of held me back because I was always thinking, this is what I need to do to be accepted. And then one day I just decided, you know what, I'm just going to be me. I'm going to be professional, but I'm going to be me. This is the life experience I have. This is what I've acquired. Of course, after reporting at the border, I did a lot of stories on immigration and cartel-related crime. So I had some, you know, I put up my stocks a bit. I had some credibility, won a couple awards. So you get a little more confidence. But at the end of the day, I was still young. I still am fairly young for this profession. So, but I just decided I'm going to do me and I can do the best I can by being me. And I turned a corner. So now when I'm reporting, right, I think I do have a lot of young people who follow me from all the different markets. They follow me primarily on social. That's how I've identified with them. They email me a lot. They communicate. Sometimes they're people who are interested in journalism, and sometimes they're just viewers, right? And I'll notice, like the people that are always retweeting you or always sharing your Facebook, eventually the traffic you start to notice, right? And it's kind of a compliment, right? Because it's like, well, these younger people are resonating with me, right? So I think that's happening because I'm just me, right? Because at the end of the day, I am who I am at this point in my life with my life experience. And so I do the best I can do for my viewers of every age group. And I'm nobody else but Stephanie Bertini, the journalist.
Have you ever reached a roadblock where you can say business has mixed in or bumped heads with your responsibility to the public, like to your ethics? Because I can tell that you're very passionate about the people.
Right.
So how do you do when maybe you're conflicted with business and you're not able
Right.
to tell stories? How, like, when's been the biggest time and how have you overcome that?
Well, okay. First of all, work at any local news station and try to do a story on a car dealership. Most of the car dealerships, they're advertisers. So the sales department, those are their clients, right? So you get a news tip about a car dealership that's a client, I mean, you're going to have the sales department on you, right? My advice is you fight, okay? If you're covering that story because it's important, you fight. You will not always win. You go to your news director. You explain why you want to do this story. You fight. I have always been a fighter. I will never put my ethics aside. And if at the end of the day they don't let me do that story, fine, you pay me. But you better bet I'm pitching it to you again in a couple weeks if I get another news tip. You have to keep fighting. I have fought for stories that have taken a year to get on the air. But you don't forget about those people. And you explain to them, look, this has to go through my producers. This has to go through my news director. This has to be vetted. I am not the only person. I have to pitch the story. I will get back to you. And if the answer is no, you explain. I believe in transparency. If you're ethical, be transparent. This is why, right? And you're professional about it, but this is why. But I won't forget about you. This is my cell phone number. Keep calling me. I had a woman, her name was Barb Pilon. She was from Sudbury, Ontario. I reported on her flooded house. She called me every single week until I left that market on my desk phone. You're my angel, thank you. So they ended up building her a new house. Like basically the short of it is that a lot of issues with insurance. I mean, she was an older woman. Her husband had died. She had no children. She had nobody to fight for her, right? So the first couple pitches, my news director kind of said, well, I don't know, what do we? Finally, when we did the story, this woman got a new house. She got contractors in there redoing her house. So the point about it is that you never want to forget about these people. There was another family, there was a young girl, and this is gruesome. She went missing. And her body was in pieces all over the woods. So before investigators found that out, her parents were trying to get the media to cover the missing posters. They were poor. They were not that educated, and nobody was listening to them. Their daughter was maybe, I don't remember exactly how old, maybe 14 or 15, but the point of the story is there, police were like, she's a runaway. Well, she was murdered. She wasn't a runaway. I managed to do that story. We did a couple stories. We put pressure on police. They found her. They found her dead. But the point of that is that her mom never forgot about me. They made T-shirts, rest in peace, family something. She came to the station to give me one of those T-shirts, okay? So fighting has a payoff. You're not going to change everybody's life, but you can make ordinary people feel like they matter. You might be the only person that cares about them. And that's a big deal, right? And we shouldn't take that for granted. So in short, sometimes the business side comes into play, but you gotta keep fighting. So I think this one I already went through. Do we have any more? Okay, any more from the audience? Yeah, go ahead.
You say that you do mostly investigative reporting.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to know why you chose that route, because recently we've been learning a lot about how expensive it is to produce investigative reporting, and that they a lot of newspapers and they just choose not to do involve so much investigation just because it's expensive, and a lot of people aren't really viewing them as much.
Right.
So I just want to know why you chose investigative reporting. Why?
So my experience, a lot of my experience that I've acquired has been sort of like I fell into it, so to speak. But I talked about taking every opportunity before I worked. I continued to do that in the newsroom. So my first job, I started as a reporter. Well, within the first job, I hosted entertainment segment until they got rid of it. I also did weather, including making the graphics, and I also anchored weekend. By the end of it, I was the anchor, producer, executive producer, weather person, weather graphic person, and I used to check all the reporter packages for the weekend show, Saturday and Sunday. I did all of that in my first job by the end of it, okay? Then I went to South Texas. In South Texas, I was a general assignment reporter. Eventually, they gave me and a co-anchor 2 newscasts, so I was anchoring as well. And the investigative reporting happened where my news director said, this is still something we want to do. We don't have the resources to do it. It was market 80-something. But I want reporters who are going to come to me and pitch. And that's what I would do. I would go out, I would talk to sources, and I would pitch. The piece that I won the National Edward R. Murrow for, the story was exposing how the Mexican drug cartels were making their way into small American police departments along the border. This was my first American market. I got that story because we heard that a police officer on the street had been threatened via a letter. I never got my hands on that letter, but every day I went out on any story, and every time I was in front of a police chief or a veteran officer, have you heard this? And a lot of people heard it. And then a lot of people told me, this is not uncommon. We're getting threats from, the cartels and cartel operatives all the time. And then I finally got a veteran officer to talk to me concealed. Now, we can talk forever about whether to conceal sources or not. In this case, we had multiple accounts off the record, and we knew it to be true. And we concealed him, and we did that story. That story won one of the biggest awards in the industry, right? And that took a year, right? So, yes, investigative units, we've seen them disappear. I think the industry is and will continue to go back because that is the credibility of the brands. Every station is different in terms of their approach, but the bottom line is you need to pitch them, right? You need to pitch them. No news director or producer, trust me, will say no to a good investigative report. They may not pay you for all the work that goes into getting it, right? But when you do internships, they usually don't pay you either, right? That's the price of admission.
So let's say it's really hard to get an interview or ask someone when you're doing an investigation, if they don't want to be featured or they don't want to be, they're very careful with what they say. So let's say I interviewed someone that had a story. He was an ex-CIA, and he had a couple stories about things that happened in, I believe, Nicaragua, and it had to do with the Ira-Contra. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. And they're just like, it's really hard to get the information out of these people, and I would ask questions to, pull and see what else I can get, but they hold back a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So like I just wanted to know like just like the process in order to actually get them to, you know, come
So
out a little more, speak to you a little more, feel a little more comfortable because I felt like, you know, I got to know this person. I spoke with him for 2 months. We would sit down once every week, and you know, he wanted to write a book, and I just offered to listen, and I told him, you know, like you know, I'm not gonna promise anything, but I'm here to listen, and you know, keep it confidential, and it was just very hard to really break through that door.
mm-hmm.
Someone opening up to you and telling you, you know, a lot of stories. And this happened. This individual is from Miami,
Mm-hmm.
so I just wanted to know like how you were.
So have you done the story yet?
Currently working on it.
Right.
But as I said, this person, he's very, very low key. He's careful with what he says, so it's really hard for me to sometimes get certain stories out of him. You know, so right now I'm working more on what he did previously, and then like he's kind of working on eventually evolving the story, you know, to get a little deeper into that. But obviously, you know, we have to have that level of it.
Right. So when working with sources on and off the record, it's all about the trust, right? So that's a very important part of the process, that relationship, the trust. Sometimes you talk to subjects on background, off record, however you want to reference it, for years, and their story only comes to fruition, you know, years later. So it's an individual process, and it's definitely a process. I've noted the more big stories I've done in my career, the more investigative reports I did, the more tips I would get, and the more people would come to me and say, I want you to tell my story. So nothing can defend you as much as your resume, what you've done. And that's a little hard when you're starting off, right? So that's where the relationships come in. Again, this is a process. Again, getting back to honing the craft, right? Ethics is a big part of this. So if right now in university, you're working on this story, talking to this source, and you never do the story, it is not lost because you are honing a piece of the craft, which comes down to working sources and how to get them. Sometimes, you know, if you have a news agency behind you, they're more likely to trust you. That's true, you know, it's a credibility thing too. But everything you're doing, and I can't stress this enough, like this starting the craft, whether it's working sources or doing anything else, it starts now. It starts from the day you make the decision, I want to be a journalist, right? And you continue to do this throughout your career. And eventually, you draw on your experiences from the past. Well, I remember last time I worked a source on this story, I had these roadblocks, etc. What do I do next, right? What do I do to troubleshoot this issue? I will say very briefly, and I can't talk about the story because it never made air, but I had a huge investigation I was working on, and I went to my news director and I said, we can't do this. And because I knew that if I did this story, it would harm the person that was telling me the story. So you can't get so caught up in the idea of this that you forget, right? That people and their well-being is what matters most, right? Sometimes we will tell stories and it will benefit the greater good, and some will get the short end of the stick. But you have to be able to go to bed every night and wake up every morning and look at yourself in the mirror and say, I did the best I could to protect every single stakeholder involved, right? So that's part of the craft too. Yes.
Seniors were about to graduate.
Right.
So they really appreciate all the information that you share. Thanks for Sylvia and Alexander for bringing it. A couple of things. You share so much good information that I always say, somebody like you know, we have stuff in the book, we talk to the students in the classroom, but just to hear it from you, it's magic because they listen.
Thank you.
So one thing, since you've been moving to different markets, you started very young, what would you tell these students when they start in a new market? They don't belong there because they don't have family members there. How do you first start? You say, this is where I'm going to get my news. You know, where are you going to get the story ideas to pitch to your news director?
That's a great question. So the advice is for new grads who actually end up getting that job, starting in their first market as you continue to move. If you're not from these communities, how do you embed yourself, right? So there's a couple things that a lot of veteran journalists talk about, and I've done them, and I would say that they work, right? So again, getting back to this point that stories are everywhere, right? So you have to have a certain element of like putting yourself out there, right? So I would not encourage going and joining a bunch of different organizations, because you got to make sure, like, if you're attaching your name to something, there's credibility too, right? So you don't want to go and be with a bunch of organizations, nonprofit, unless you've really vetted them. But what you can do is pay attention to things that are happening in your community and be there on and off the job. For years, every time I went out on a story or I was out at an event, my job was, I got to go home with a story idea, at least an idea, right? Maybe not a contact, maybe not everything, but an idea. Look, you go to the coffee shop, right? Instead of, let's say you go to Starbucks 4 times a week in this place that you work, wherever it is in the United States, right? So maybe 2 out of those 4 times plan, I'm going to bring my laptop or my iPad or this book. Who reads book nowadays? I still do. And I'm going to stay here for maybe half an hour. I'm going to build this into my day. Maybe it's my off day, working in my first market, because I want to pay attention to what's going on. When you're working communities, everything from how people speak to how they dress to the cars that they drive, this is all indicative of the stories that are out there, right? But you have to put yourself in these communities, right? So once I took a seminar at the Pointer Institute, and they talked about this as like using the pillars or the posts in your community. So, the coffee shops, the diner that's, owned by that family who's had it for decades. You want to eat there, right? You want to like talk to the locals. You want people to know you're a reporter, because then eventually the stories will come to you, but you got to be present in the community. Even my job, it has changed so much, right? From what I used to do out there compared to what I do inside now. So much is done online now. Social media is a great resource to gather news. Sometimes you can get story ideas from social media. So much is done online, but I can't stress enough that old school shoe leather reporting. You got to be out there. The first market I was in, limited resources. This is about 9-10 years ago now. I mean, we didn't have a story. We would get in the news unit and we would go. Cafes, coffee shops, city hall, like we're looking for a story, right? And so when you're off the job, that doesn't stop, right? So the only way to really get stories in a new community that you don't understand is to understand it. And the only way to understand it is to be in it, right? So I hope that kind of addresses, yeah? Yeah.
You were talking about how this journalism is all about learning and continuing on growing and everything. Do you have like an ultimate goal that you want to attain within your career, or a certain position that you would love to have in the future?
Right. So I always wanted, and still do want to work at the network level in New York. New York is the #1 American market, right? So that's still a goal that I have and that I'm aspiring towards. A big goal for me, so you look at main goals and then you look at, Les Rose talked about, think about where you want to be in 5 years, right? So you need shorter goals. So at first it was, I'm going to get my first job. Then it was, I'm going to get to the US. Then it was, I'm going to get to a bigger market. Then it was, I'm going to get to an O&O, owned and operated. So now I'm in the O&O. So what I'm saying is that you have to have the large goals, and it's great to have these huge, large dreams, but then you have to look at it and you have to decide, okay, what can I do now to get me to where I want to be in the next couple years? Every year in January, I get a notebook, and I still do this. I've done this for my entire career. And at the beginning of the notebook, I write career goals. I put the date. It's always January 1st, and I write the career goals. And I put them in categories, performance, career, etc. So like 2-3 years ago, I said, at that time, I was going to a lot of seminars to learn. And I said, 2-3 years ago, I said, start moving towards hosting seminars. But I didn't know what that looked like, right? Because, I knew that I'd go. I understood kind of like how they're conducted. So then I started with talking to my mentors, how do I do this? And I got in at the high school level, putting on it's STN. They do a big convention. I don't know if some of you are familiar with it every year. And then from STN, that evolved into going into different places. So, fast forward, I'm sitting in front of you now, right? So that's just one example, right? But when you look at your career and your goals, right, it's not just if you're in TV, what station I want to work for. It's what are my goals as a journalist and where do I want to be in a year, in 2 years, in 3 years, etc. And hold yourself accountable. Do things to get yourself there, right? Any more questions? Oh, we have another one from the web. For a journalist, what does a good resume or portfolio contain? Okay, so obviously the medium is dependent on this, like print would be different from radio, from TV, but generally, in general, as much experience as possible. So now, right, what do you do today to start working on craft? We're talking about craft and TV, but in general, what are you doing today to become a better writer, a better reporter, a better researcher, et cetera, et cetera? And then what are the internships that you can get under your belt? What are the things you can do here at your school community, writing for the paper? I was interviewed by one of you, and I was so impressed, interviewed in terms of, for an article that was in the school paper about me coming here, and so impressed with the line of questioning, the research that was done into that, right? I was impressed by that because, you know, this is someone who technically is studying to be a journalist, not a journalist yet, but who had put that work in, right? So you always want to act like you are a professional, right? So that portfolio has to have a resume with as much experience as possible. Do not say no to any opportunity, right? It has to have samples. At the end of the day, if you want to write, find somewhere to write. You have to find somewhere to write. You got to write for something if you want to write in the future. The best advice I ever got from a mentor in Canada early on in my career is do the job now, or the thing now that sets you up for the job you want to do. So even if you're not getting paid for it, you need to find somewhere to do it, right? And then you collect these samples. I think the best resumes have lists of experience, no matter what level, because a person can look at it and say, I mean, it's not impressive, right? If I went to a news director and said, I worked in a green room serving coffee, they'd be like, well, you're 10 years in your career. Like, can't you do something better? But if it's a news director in a small market, and if I'm the boss and I see a resume, you did that? Why did you do that? Well, I wanted to, you know, meet some people who are actually on the air and meet some producers and just kind of understand how everything works. I would be absolutely impressed by that. So a resume, a list of things that you've done that indicate what you want to do, and work samples. And obviously you want your strongest stories, whether it's a demo reel or an audio tape if you're doing radio or recording now. I remember that, I have to remember that they're all digital files now. Or, you know, samples of the work, right? So you want strong samples, a few, and you want to be able to talk about, if you do get to the interview process, those goals. What you want to do long term, what you want to do short term. And if they throw a curveball at you, well, I don't have a job as a reporter, but I can get you in to do this. That's a whole other list of conversations. So if this happens to you, you can email me. But I would say at the professional level for the first job, you don't want to say no to opportunities, but you don't want to take on opportunities that aren't going to get you anywhere, right? So if you can be in Miami by being an AP in television, or you can go to a much smaller place and be a reporter, go be a reporter, right? You want to do the jobs that are going to set you up for the job you want to do next. Okay, any final questions? Because we're wrapping up now. Anybody else? Yes. Mm-hmm.
So we don't really have demo reels.
Right.
How would you deal with that? Like, we're all graduating, trying to get out there.
Right.
You know, one of our classes has a YouTube channel, so it's cool for him. But it's like, if you don't have that demo reel or that YouTube channel,
right.
How can you show that you are experienced, you have experience, and how can you show your passion for it if they can't see it?
So just so I understand, in the broadcast classes, are you doing video stories?
Like right now, yeah. Like in the final year of the service.
So you're doing video stories. Well, that's your demo reel.
We might do like 2 stories. Like if we get on camera, because it's very hard to get the cameras in when we do have like a
Right.
story, but we don't have enough to create a demo reel. So we don't use social media.
A demo reel, right, can be 3 stories. Okay. To be honest, that whole montage that you saw at the top, montages are used in demo reels when you have something to show. In other words, if this is your first job, what do you have to show? Right. You want to show your news director, if it's one piece, if one of you came to me and I'm a news director in a small market and you did an investigative report here and I have an entry-level reporter job, you're getting the job. You know why? Because you did an investigative report. How impressive is that? You have to use the resources that you have. If there are only 2 stories, well, that's your demo reel. If you can use those 2 stories to leverage some place, whether it's online or not, that you can be doing work for free, maybe as an internship, or even if you're not getting accredited for it, but as a volunteer to feed the video process, yes. If you get that camera overnight and you don't sleep that night to get a couple pieces of video for your demo reel, maybe that's what you should do, right? And if it requires investing in your own equipment or getting together a group of you and renting some equipment, this is what we're gonna do to make a demo reel, well, that's what you gotta do. I and my parents, shout out to them, have invested a lot of money in my career, okay? It's an expensive thing. Like, you have to be able to invest in order to get, you go to these conferences, you gotta pay to register for the conferences, right? But in TV, for example, the equipment we work with every day is worth a lot of money. Like, this is what the thing is, right? And everybody can only work within their means. But the point is that between networking and everything else that we talked about and really honing your craft, if all you have when you graduate from here is one TV story, that should be enough to get you in at least one door. And what you do when you get in that door is on you at that point, right?
Well, thank you very much for coming. And Stephanie, this has been marvelous.
Aw,
So
thank you. Thank you for having me.
I think what she's given all of you is an idea of how to invest in your own future. That's basically what you need to do. So think about all of these things, and we really do appreciate her being with us today. Thank you.
Thank you. If you'd like the handout, I have it here with the I'll give you, I do have enough, but I'll give you some copies if the other professors are interested in photocopying. It's back in front. Here you go.